Hey everyone, welcome to Global Game Jam. My name is Darryl Purdy, and I'm currently the Director of Cinematics at Eidos Montreal. Well, at the risk of sounding old, I have been in video games now for 19, going on 20 years, I suppose. And I've been in the entertainment and animation industry for roughly 25. I was trained as an animator in CG animation, and my first job was actually in television, working on Saturday morning cartoons and on a sci-fi series. In those days, it was early CG production days, and we tended to be a bit more generalists than specialists. So even though animation was my primary role, I also had to dabble in modeling and rigging, doing compositing, you know, even some VFX and rotoscoping. But I always knew I loved video games. And when I figured out that, video games uses a lot of animation, I started to look throughout kind of Canada basically to see, what were the options for video games. And I found a studio in Montreal that was looking for people, and, we worked out a deal and they wanted to hire me. So my wife and I uprooted our lives from the east coast of Canada and we moved to Montreal. Sadly, a few weeks after we arrived in Montreal, that studio was going through financial problems, which I didn't know about, and they shut their doors, which left me, without a job. So basically, after getting past the shock and the anxiety of being unemployed and being in a new city where you don't know anybody and you don't know the culture, I kind of put my head down and I started to rework on my demo reel. So I spent, simultaneously would be still reaching out to video game companies, but working on my reel at the same time. And so after a few months, I put together a reel that was specifically geared towards the role that I wanted in video games, which at that point was a gameplay animator. So I knew I needed to have good physicality, good motion. I had a bunch of combat tests in there, some weight tests, just to show that I understood body mechanics. And luckily, after months of work and anxiety, a company called Artificial Mind and Movement gave me a shot. They asked me to come in for an interview on a Friday, and then luckily they were happy with what I could offer, and they asked if I could start on Monday, and that was kind of the beginning of my journey in video games. The closest thing I could compare a cinematic director to would be a film director. If you went kind of like the role to role. The difference in video games is that the cinematic portion of a video game is nested within a larger narrative of the video game. So as the cinematic director, I would be responsible for taking all the core non-playable story moments and bringing them from a script to a final movie, and taking those individual movies, each individual cinematics, and planning with the rest of the game team how they fit into the larger narrative of the game. As a cinematic director, if I could condense kind of like the overall pipeline into a 1 minute explanation, would be, we get a script, and my cinematographer and storyboard artist and I sit down and we start to design what the eventual visuals will be. So what cameras are we going to use? What shots? How are we going to stage it? Where the actors or where the characters, how are they going to be blocked through the scene? Once we've decided that, we go into our performance capture volume and we shoot the scenes with the actors. So in performance capture, I'm responsible to direct all performance capture and direct the actors. And from there, we take that data and we oversee the cinematic animation team to make sure that those actors' performances are accurately represented on their digital counterparts or their digital characters. From there, after that, we go into kind of our post process, and I kind of guide or overall have an overview of that post process, whether it be lighting, VFX, sound design. All of those things are kind of influenced by the cinematic director, because any given sequence or any area of the story is always going to need some type of help, whether it be a certain type of lighting so that we can, create a certain mood, or whether it be we want a certain score in a scene and we want it to crescendo at a certain point because it's going to underscore an emotional breakthrough of a character. So all of this kind of story design and overview is part of the cinematic director's role, and they work with other departments to realize that goal and give you a finished cinematic or film scene at the end in the game. I don't know if I have hacks to help convey humor or drama, but you definitely have tools, storytelling tools in your toolbox as a director. And those are kind of your traditional ones, whether it be the composition of your frame, where you put the camera, the angle, the lighting, they can all convey different emotions. Sound design and music have a huge impact on, how scenes are perceived. And then motion on within the frame and the actor's performance. All of these things go into kind of this recipe to hopefully either land a comedy scene or a dramatic scene. I think maybe the best way to describe it is to kind of give you a couple examples of scenes and how we dealt with them. Early on in the game, there's a scene, and it's not a cinematic scene, but it's kind of like a little performance scene that happens where the Guardians are stuck on one side of this chasm and they have no way across. Drax decides that the easiest way to get across is to grab Rocket and throw him across, and then Rocket can open the bridge on the other side, and then they can be on their way. Well, of course, Rocket is not down with this plan, but it's up to the player and Star-Lord to make the decision. So if you allow Drax to throw Rocket across, of course, Rocket is really upset. And he's on the other side of the chasm, and he's cursing you and throwing a tantrum, and he's, shooting his gun in the air. And Star-Lord kind of says, okay, relax, Rocket. Just open the bridge and we'll give you another 5%, of the cut on this job. And there's this long dramatic pause where nobody says anything. And then Rocket, you don't know how Rocket's going to react. And he comes back, I want 10. Because for Rocket, it's all about the money, right? And so that moment is funny when that dramatic pause is there. But when it was first integrated, somebody had cut out that pause, whether they thought that the audio file just had extra fat on it, so they cut it, they trimmed it, and when it was put in, Rocket's line came back to back with Star-Lord's, and it really didn't work. It didn't land at all. So we went back in and intentionally put in that long dramatic pause, and then, of course, that is the anticipation for the punchline, and without that pause, that joke would never land. Another example where we had to kind of toe the line of comedy and drama within the same scene was a scene that was, it's quite late in our game, and I apologize to anybody. This is a spoiler, but I think it's a great example of cultivating this type of scene. You meet this character in our game, Nikki. She's a 13-year-old, and throughout the progress of the story, it is likely that this is Star-Lord's child that he had with a former acquaintance, Karel. And in this scene late in the story where Star-Lord has come to accept that he is this girl's father, he's talking with the ghost of Karel. And basically what happens in the scene is very heartfelt, is that he's looking to Karel for help and answers on how does he take care of this child. And Karel has to tell him, look, you're on your own. I'm dead. I'm gone. And, this hurts Peter because Karel has a spot in Peter's heart. And not only is Karel dead, but she's also saying, you're the only one who can help my daughter, and I'm trusting her life and I'm putting it in your hands. So this is really big stuff we're dealing with here, and it's very heartfelt. But within that scene, in the middle of it, there is a joke that Karel she says something. And basically what it is when she tells Peter, Nikki is not your daughter. This kind of rocks Peter, and Peter's like, oh, okay, so I'm not a dad? And Karel says, no. Well, you're not her dad. Basically insinuating that Peter is promiscuous and he might have hundreds of kids in the galaxy, but Nikki is not his. But she's basically taking a dig at his character. And I remember when we read that, I thought, oh, how do we make that joke work? Because it could unravel all of the really lovely, heartfelt stuff that we have if she does kind of a character attack. So this is where I say it's always a balance where you're trying to find the right intention for a line so that it works within a scene. And what was really lovely, Judith, the actress who plays Carell, after we ran the scene a few times, we kind of found the moment where, if she played that line from the heart and not play the end result as in the dig, she plays the idea that it was her last I love you, or I trust you with my daughter's life, and she says it genuinely, then it could work. And when Judith performed it, not only did it work, but it became the moment in the scene that took a good scene and made it a great scene. As a director, I actually think there's definitely room for improvisation when you're creating a scene. But there's certain things that you also need to keep in mind. So when I'm developing a scene or when I'm preparing for a scene, I like to be very, very prepared. So I will have read the script hundreds of times. I'll have made thousands of notes. I have a vision of what the scene should look like in my head, even the performances. So, everybody I think probably comes into that room on the day with a preconceived notion of what the scene is going to be. But also, as a director, I think it's my job to be ready to throw all of that out the window if there's something better that happens on the day. And that's what I mean about improv. You all come prepared, but as you're doing this thing in real time, allow space for whoever, the actors or, whoever else, if it's the narrative director that's on the set or even the staff and the crew sometimes, to have kind of creative ideas. And, a great example of that is, we have this moment in Guardians when the Guardians are planning kind of their escape from Lady Hellbender, and they're going to kind of like, screw her over and steal from her. And they're kind of formulating their plan late at night in a hallway. And when the scene starts, it cuts to Star-Lord, and he has this tentacle wrapped around his neck, and he kind of takes it and he puts it in his hand, he kisses it, and he says, oh, no, I'll call you later. That whole bit about him improving this romantic moment with this alien creature, that was all improved by John. But what was great about that, John is the actor that plays Star-Lord, what was great about that is at a certain point, if you leave space for everybody to kind of bring their own creativity, the actors, at one point, you do, as a director, for me, I need to release some of my control over the characters and trust it to the actors, because the actors are the ones that embody these characters. And at one point, they're going to be better positioned to judge what is right and wrong for the character. So it's my job as a director to create a safe space where the actors can feel free to improv or take a chance when they feel something. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but that's okay. When it does work, 100% of the time, it makes the scene better, in my opinion. Some advice I'd give to people if they wanted to become a cinematic director, first and foremost, be a student of storytelling and everything that means. So understand writing, story structure, how different stories are structured in different ways, because not all stories are the same. Start to learn about visual storytelling, scene composition, basically movement, on screen, lighting, all of these things you're going to need to know to be able to tell a story. Also learn about editing, learn about sound design and basically post-process and stuff like that, because all of these things you're going to have to touch as a cinematic director to try to bring this story to life. For myself, I felt my background in character animation was invaluable, because as a character animator, in essence, I was doing some of the stuff that actors do. where, I mean, I would get a dialogue track and then I would have to embody that character and act out certain things as reference for my animation pass. So when I got into a performance capture volume and I had to direct actors, I kind of just had a natural vocabulary and lexicon to be able to speak to them in the way that kind of felt natural to them, because I was always talking from an internal motivation rather than an external goal. So I thought that was, that was very beneficial to me. But also, if you want to be a cinematic director, like in games, you need to understand game development in general. So again, another benefit to having come up the way I did was I was a gameplay animator, then I was a lead animator of a gameplay team, and then I was an animation director of gameplay. So I got to, understand game development from the idea of producing stuff not just for narrative content, but for the gameplay side. So I understood stuff about metrics and level design, also about programming and how to build systems and how animation fits into that and how storytelling fits into that. So learning the intricacies of game design as a whole, I think makes me a better cinematic director, because really our cinematics do not stand on their own. They have to be thread or like sewn into a larger game narrative. And if you understand how the rest of the game works, you can make better decisions as a cinematic director for when your scenes have to come up in a level or in any moment. As for if, it's better to come from film rather than game, I don't know if it's better or worse. I can't speak to a film director coming in, but what I would say is all the tools that a film director is going to have is going to serve them very well in the cinematic portion of their job, as in storytelling in the cinematic form. What is going to be problematic is, one, has that film director ever done CG production? Because live action production is much different than CG production. So that would be one thing. Even for the cinematics, if I was a film director coming in only from live action, I would really start to try to understand CG production and animation. And then in the larger game thing, I would really start to educate myself on how games are made and, where cinematics fit within the game flow and what are the things that, technically how cinematics have to plug into the rest of the game, because everything is rendered in real time. It's not pre-rendered. So you're always collaborating with other departments. So maybe to expand upon like the relationship of a cinematic director or the cinematic department with other departments in the game development team, really what it is just constant communication and back and forth. Because for a narrative-driven game to work really well, the ideal end result is you can go from a gameplay moment where the player has the controller in their hands and they're controlling the player to a story moment where control is taken away from them and they go into a cinematic and then back into gameplay. And if you've done your job well, it's not clunky or it feels natural, okay, is what you're going for. In order to do that, it takes daily collaboration with all the departments. From level design, the idea is like, if you're designing a level, you have to be aware that, in this section, it's going to be navigation, which is designed different than, say, this combat area, which is designed different. And then all of that leads to this cinematic moment, and the story needs X, Y, Z. So ideally, as a cinematic director, what you're trying to do is in those team meetings, you're trying to represent what the story is going to need in that location or that level. And you're working with the art director and the level design director and all of their people to try to prepare them so they have the most information possible so that they know what to expect and how to design a level. The same can be said about all the other departments. When you're talking about post-process of a cinematic, if you talk about sound design, I had mentioned before, sound is so important to a cinematic to convey a certain emotion. You can have the exact same scene with two different music tracks and it can feel drastically different. So when I was working on Guardians with the audio director, Steve, what we would do is we would meet and start to talk about sequences, and I would give him kind of the intention I was looking for from a story, as in this moment, if it's like an original score, it's a very emotional moment, and at this point the character has a breakthrough, so maybe we need a build-up of music that kind of crescendos or accentuates that breakthrough, and then maybe we go tail off, and then we're going into this gameplay moment. So we would discuss kind of like how the scene starts, what is the arc of the overall scene, and where does it end, and what does it go into the game. And then Steve, with his decades of experience in audio design, will go away with the composer and with his team and kind of come up with a structure, and then we would meet again. So it's constant back and forth iteration and communication with all departments. When it comes to character development and whether a character is an established character or a brand new character, I think there are a lot of similarities for me from a director standpoint. So I've mentioned before, maybe I'm kind of overemphasizing this fact, but you always are trying to dig into the heart of the story and each scene. And for the characters, you are trying to get to the soul and the core of what they are doing, why they're doing it, why they say what they say, what do they want in the scene. And you're always trying to make sure that you and the actor are coming from an inside-out approach, and they're accurately representing the emotional kind of through line of each character. Now, where it becomes a bit different when you have an established character that has been in either, let's say for the Guardians, in comics and in the MCU, there's a preconceived notion from the public already going into that series or that scene or whatever, that the public already has an idea of what they expect. And that can be difficult sometimes because you might not give them what they expect. But hopefully, if you've done your job well and they are true to the scene and the situation in which they're in, it'll be easier for those people to let go of their preconceived notions and buy in to what you are showing them. With Guardians, it was wonderful because Marvel was very generous at the beginning to tell us, look, we want you to put your own spin on this franchise. We want you to kind of, make your own unique kind of Guardians. Now, in doing so, we also made the conscious decision to say, it would be silly to disregard the past 50-year history of this franchise. So, what we did as a team is we dug into the comics. We dug into the MCU, the other video games that might have been out with the Guardians, and we kind of pulled influences from all of those, and we tried to pay tribute to those in areas, but we tried to leave a decent amount of space where we could put our own spin on it. And I truly believe we hit kind of a sweet spot where the characters feel somewhat familiar, but they do feel unique in their own way.